Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of How Stories Work. Today, I want to talk about incomplete story forms. With the over 500 different story forms that you can find in subtext right now, most of them are complete. No matter what you see here, you'll find a story form that is at least complete. What does it mean to be complete? What it means is that, let's say, for instance, we take a look at, let's do Forrest Gump. So if we look at Forrest Gump here, you'll see everything here is complete. You have the main character through line, influence character through line, objective story through line, and the relationship story through line. And the idea is that when you have a complete story form, when you have all these different story points in here, that's the reason why a film or a novel or a play, why it can last forever, because there is something there that you can't get in real life, which is meaning from all four perspectives, all four through lines at once. Recently, I finally added the ability in subtext to add incomplete story forms. And one of the best, clearest examples is the movie 1917. If you haven't seen 1917, it's about two British soldiers who have to cross no man's land to warn another group of soldiers that they're walking into a trap, and that if they go forward with their plan to attack at dawn, they're all going to get massacred. Beyond the simplicity, two soldiers crossing no man's land, is the idea that the individual through lines are really clear, except there's one that is missing. Have you ever had the feeling that perhaps this movie was okay? I really liked it. It was really tense, really exciting, and I was really engaged in it, but there was just something missing. I'm going to explain to you what that is that was missing and how it could have been fixed. So if you go into 1917 here, you'll see at the top, it'll say missing or incomplete story form. The premise of 1917 is when you get out of your way and abandon avoiding a group, you can deliver a message. The idea is that the main character, who is Lance Corporal William Schofield here, his whole issue is that he's always running away from things. He's always avoiding. So if you see him at the very beginning, he's always running away and he really doesn't want to go on the mission. And then there's the little bit of main character stuff where he talks about how he doesn't want to go home. He can't go back to that. Then on the other side of the argument is the influence character, who is Tom, who is the one who chooses Will to go with him. And his point of view or his motivation is pursuit. So they ask him to do it. It's his brother that's going to go over in that attack wave. And so he agrees to do it. And so their argument is one of pursuit to avoid. If you haven't seen the film, I'm going to spoil it for you, but poor Tom here gets shot before the midway point of the story. And then at the end, when Will finally makes it to the bunker that he's supposed to, the Benedict Cumberbatch character, Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie, takes over that pursuit element. What's really nice about thinking of a story this way is that you can actually hand off these motivations from one character to another. And this is a perfect example of this. The main character through line stays with Will from beginning to end. And then in the influence character through line, we have Tom for the first half. There's at the end, Mackenzie comes in to take over. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a bit here. If you come up here and you look at a complete story, you'll see it's made up of four perspectives: the objective story through line, the main character through line, the influence character through line, and the relationship story through line. And as you can see here, marked it very clearly, and I've dropped out the color, the relationship story is missing. And in short, that means the heart of the narrative is missing. If the objective story plot is where the headline is and where all the logical, rational concerns of goals and consequence or stakes, then the relationship story through line is where all the heart is. And it's typically the relationship between the main character and the influence character. Not only just because of the fact that Tom died, they really have no relationship beyond friends that is carried forward at all. And even if somebody passes away or a character drops out, you can still continue that relationship. You could even transfer it to another relationship. But unfortunately, 1917, it's not there. That's what gives it that feeling of technically it's really cool because it's just made up of those two shots. But then the heart of it, you definitely care about what's going on, but that there is something missing in there. And that's the relationship storytelling. You can see here, it balances out the plot, whereas the influence character's challenging point of view balances out the main character's point of view. The same thing happens here with the relationship story and the objective story plot. When you don't have that, the audience instinctively knows that something is missing and therefore will nominate it for best screenplay because the story is actually physically missing something to make it a complete story. The objective story plot is about delivering a message to call off a doomed attack. We have the main character, Will Schofield, and then I indicate the handoff here from Blake to Mackenzie. And then, of course, the relationship story is missing. And then you can also see it here down in the transits. Transits are a different way of thinking of the acts of your story. If you are familiar with a 3-act structure, the first transit is typically where the first act is. Then the next 2 transits are your act 2. So if you're familiar with 2A and 2B, and then the last transit is the 3rd act. And you can see here, again, the colors dropped out. I left them in here so you could see how would I be able to fix this? As I mentioned before, this is the heart of the story. This is where you would actually have the heart line to balance out the headline. And if you come down in here, you can see that it would be about a relationship that is growing or becoming something, so that the nature of that relationship itself is actually growing. If you were to explore Will and Tom's initial relationship, perhaps that they just know each other and that there's a shared brotherhood and that then they become friends at the end, or there's a stronger friendship that they would grow through, that would be the essence of what this relationship story through line would be. But of course, Tom passes away here. In the beginning, there are some allusions towards conceptualizing, which is figuring out how they're going to get across and what kind of plan they're going to take on. Conceiving, maybe there might be something there to the effect of when they're first walking through the cherry blossoms and what that is, but there's really no development of their relationship. I'm not really sure how they're related to one another beyond just the fact that they're working together. That working soldier relationship is something that would be found in the objective story through line. The relationship story through line is a bond that's something else that's actually in between those 2 characters and almost works as a character itself. If you're to think of the essence of their relationship, how does it grow from figuring out how everything fits together to then getting an idea of, oh, okay, maybe this is what's going on with us, then pretending or at least fulfilling those roles that they had agreed to or would imagine would work out. And then, of course, then that develops into transferring and transmuting and manifesting into something even greater. The friendship in the beginning, if it was to come into some other way of existence, if there was some way to continue that relationship, or perhaps there's some other sort of relationship that you want to explore, it would have to go through these 4 transits in order to balance out and work with everything else that's going on in the rest of the story. You can see this happen here in the transits for the influence character. Tom takes these first 2 and he dies right about here. And then in the 3rd one, there is the part where when Will is floating down the river, he's reminded of Tom's sacrifice with the cherry blossom petals that fall into the water. And then here, this is when he meets up with Mackenzie, and Mackenzie is in this complete preconscious state, which is brash or impulsive responses. Even though that is there, Will still persists and says, hey, you guys got to stop. And then he decides to not go over, and it's a success story. That's how you can hand off the influence character perspectives. In addition to pointing out that this particular film is missing the relationship story, it's also a really good example of a handoff influence character through line. The arc of the story finds the influence character being driven by feelings, and then even more so towards the feelings at the end. With Tom in the beginning, because he's full of his feelings for his brother and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And then at the end, Mackenzie takes over and has that speech about, even though we're doing this today, tomorrow we're just going to have to go back over it. And those bad feelings, that's where he's coming from. That perspective remains steadfast. Whereas for Will, he actually goes from someone who avoids, he's always running, but in the beginning, he's running away from danger. And then, of course, when he makes that decision to run across the field, that's him changing his resolve and actually running towards something as opposed to being more risk averse. That's how you get his character arc. Coming back into the influence character here real quickly, and we look at the actual individual story beats of each transit. The first one is Tom rationalizing away any danger to do with the mission because of the love for his brother. That's the subconscious aspect coming through. And then the conscious aspect, not only is he considerate towards the downed German pilot, but then also as he's bleeding out, his first thoughts are for his family and for his mother. And so you can see how Tom grows from subconscious and into conscious, then passes away. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the third is when the memory of Tom comes back and influences Will to remember what it was that Tom was working for. And then that gives him the energy to go ahead and go into the very last transit, where he then meets up with Mackenzie, who influences through his rash and violent response to continue on with the attack regardless of how he's commanded. That, of course, influences Will to have his own inappropriate response, especially to somebody who's a superior officer. And it's Will's immediate response that then drives Mackenzie to change his mind and make a different decision. So that's what I wanted to point out here with 1917. I think it's a really valuable thing to be able to teach everybody what it means to have a complete story form and to be able to provide a means for seeing what does it feel like when the story form is incomplete, because you can obviously learn a lot from that just as much as you can learn from the films that are complete and have great stories from beginning to end. If you have any questions about any of this, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next time.